Well, thank you everybody for attending today. With us is Dr. Stephen Grant, MD at Iowa Sleep Wellness Centers here in Ankeny as well as West Des Moines, Iowa. And he's going to share with us some insights about those personal fitness monitors and devices that many people are using today. And without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Stephen Grant.
Thank you very much for joining me this lunch hour. Today's lecture regards personal fitness monitors in the context of what can these devices tell me about my health, fitness, and sleep. So before I begin, I'd like to discuss some of the ideas behind these monitors. There are some guidelines that are put out by the American Heart Association, the Center for Disease Control, that clearly dictate that about 30 minutes of moderate activity 5 days a week can improve your overall health. However, we all know that it's challenging for some individuals to motivate towards this goal, the speaker included. Anyway, people understand that they need to burn more calories than they take in, but can have little awareness of where they are starting from or overall what their net balance is. It's hard to visualize where you need to go or be if you don't know exactly where you are. So getting a clue about this now involves the use of personal fitness monitors. So more on personal fitness monitors. These devices essentially promise the user data. That's what this is all about. These devices can be worn around the wrist. They can be worn on collars, belts. Sometimes they're even accessorized as jewelry. However, I find that the most popular monitors, the ones that I see in my patient population, as well as just walking around the gym, are the ones that are worn on the wrist. These monitors can be programmed to tell you more than just how much you move, but they can actually give data derived on caloric intake, caloric expenditure, sleep and activity parameters, etc. These devices in particular are largely pitched to the concepts around the worried well, and in particular the baby boom generation, which seems to show a certain amount of pertinent interest in their overall health and their physical activity. So this next slide shows some common fitness monitors that are available in the market. Again, the most common one I see are the ones that are worn around the wrist. These are very comfortable. Some say nondescript. I find them to be somewhat noticeable, if not fashionable. A very common type of these monitors are the ones that just kind of snap around and are designed to be somewhat unobtrusive. So more on personal fitness monitors. The idea is to combine a wearable device, but with a website application or a smartphone application to view or manipulate the data collected. If you think about it, the monitor itself can tell you very little. However, if you port it in to a piece of software driven by a piece of hardware, you can get a tremendous amount of information. So part of the goal of monitoring is to measure how much you are moving, but also to tell you when you're not moving. And you think about that, it's somewhat paradoxical. I think it's easy for people to understand how much physical activity that they have during the day, but even more pertinent to understand what the lack of physical activity is during the day. And when you take a look at the data that these personal monitors generate, the sedentary time or downtime, as I would characterize it, contrasts somewhat starkly with the bursts of activity to paint a mosaic, if you will, of what you find to be your most and least healthful behaviors, or times during the day when you are active or times during the day when you're not active. So the interface itself usually cues you to those periods of activity and how much activity you've essentially endeavored in, how many steps you've moved or how many calories you've burned. There's a common metric that's used that we should move about 10,000 steps per day or about 5 miles. And sometimes that's given as a benchmark for people to compare on their monitor about how well they're doing. This next slide kind of illustrates the interface of the up monitor, and you could see that the amplitude of the y-axis, the dark kind of almost reddish orange lines, show very high activity. The more subtle yellow lines show a decrease in activity all the way down to white where there's no activity. And if you can take a look at the x-axis, this is monitored over time, with on the far left being 7 a.m. in the morning, on the far right, 7:30 in the evening. So this is a 12-hour epoch or window of time. And you can see probably right around lunch, this person had quite a bit of activity, perhaps went for a walk. However, you can also contrast that with the white spaces on the graph that shows where there wasn't a lot of activity. And again, as I said before, looking at the metrics about how much people are moving, it'll even tell you how many steps you took, what the overall distance is, as well as comparing you to a goal of how much of that 10,000 steps you met that day. It will also further break down what your activity time was, how much gross time that you were active, what the longest period of activity was, as well as the longest period of inactivity, looking at your active calorie burn as well as your sedentary calorie burn. So looking a little bit more about these bands, and this just satisfies more of a curiosity on my part, I see these pieces of rubber and I say to myself, I wonder what's inside there. So as you can see, these bands, although they look kind of nondescript on the outside, they actually cover some clear instrumentation. This is another exploded view, a skeletonized view of the band. You can see at the top, there's the rechargeable battery. And what was intriguing to me is how long these devices work. I'm used to my cell phone needing to recharge that at least twice a day. However, these bands and the up band in particular can last up to 10 days on a single charge. They're also rather durable. You can see the rubber cover. I've yet to cause any significant damage to mine. They're sweat proof and water resistant. Again, I would state water resistant, not waterproof. You can see some status lights on these devices that help you to understand what mode it's in. We'll talk more on that later to understand the significance of this. You can also have some push button interfaces that allows you to put the band to sleep or to activate it. There's also a vibration motor that can provide you a silent alarm, reminding you when you need to start moving or to set an alarm. There's integrated circuitry boards that have motion sensors on them, flash memory chips that assist with storage, as well as at the bottom, a 3.5 millimeter audio plug that allows these bands to fit into different interfaces, to fit into smartphones or computers. So quite a bit of technology under that nondescript piece of rubber. More about how these bands work. Back to high school physics. If you remember what the definition of a vector was, it essentially is speed and direction. And we need to remember that acceleration has two components, speed and direction. If an object in motion experiences a change in either speed or direction, this change has an acceleration associated with it. And essentially, the motion sensors in the wristbands themselves detect these changes through tiny electromechanical elements. And these devices all have a common sensor, or what we call an accelerometer. Accelerometers track motion in 3 dimensions. You can think of it as tracking motion up, down, side to side, and back and forth, or in mathematical terms, the X, Y, and Z dimension. When these accelerometers are cued to an individual's attempted sleep period, the accelerometer is even more sensitive. In other words, the sensitivity or amplitude is dropped. And again, we need to remember that these personal fitness monitors are really good at measuring motion, not so much effort. Again, the data requires an application such as found with a smartphone or a computer to give the user a graphic display of data that has been recorded or observed by the device. So if you're wondering, these devices come in all sorts of different sizes. They come in small, medium, and large. It's not a one-size-fits-all application. Again, this is aimed at trying to make these devices as comfortable and unobtrusive as possible. Looking at the 3 most popular types of devices sold in North America, again, I'm not endorsing any one particular brand, although most of my experience has been with the Jawbone. The top 3 are the Fitbit device, the Jawbone device, and the Nike Fuel Band. Looking at the Fitbit, Jawbone, and Nike, most of these devices are price points between $60 and $200. Again, they're made of rubber or plastic. They can be purchased in an array of colors. And it's important to be mindful that these devices are big business in the United States. In 2013, activity trackers generated an estimated $290 million in U.S. sales exclusively, and that market is expected to double in calendar year 2014. So let's take a look at what's driving the popularity. Again, I think we're speaking to the baby boom generation as well as just the technology-obsessed masses and early adopters. And of note, I am not an early adopter. I've watched a number of these iterations come along before I finally jumped in. But a fair number of people that I observe at health facilities will say, hey, what's that thing on your wrist? What does it do? And how can it help me? We understand that people can realize that attempts to measure activity can actually motivate people towards an activity and specifically a goal, as well as give them information or objective data that they can measure. In one sense, I believe that there's always a certain degree of intrinsic curiosity about day-to-day activities. In other words, how many steps am I taking per day? How many hours am I working? How many hours am I active? How many hours am I sleeping at night, etc.? So, in one sense, you can take a look at these personal device monitors as a cue or an external motivator that keeps fitness on front and center, and regimens or fitness routines or times for exercise as a constant. Looking at consumers, most of the devices are marketed towards fitness-oriented millennials and the ever health-conscious baby boom generation. I find that in my own observations, there are generally two categories of users. Those that are essentially told by a physician to wear one due to an underlying health problem. And again, this is motivated towards trying to get patients to exercise. And those individuals that are really active and enjoy exercising and want more empiric data about their exercise and activity levels. There was a study that was done by the Pew Internet and American Life Project that found that 65% of American adults track their diet, exercise, and overall fitness, while 35% track other important measures of health like sleep quality. And let's just talk briefly about FDA approval. Oftentimes when we talk about devices, medical devices in particular, but any device that kind of touches upon or is tangent to health, sometimes people want to know what the Food and Drug Administration has to say about it. Direct-to-consumer activity tracking devices like the Fitbit, the Nike Fuel Band, and Jawbone don't typically secure FDA clearance. There's one notable exception to this, which is the BodyCore Media armband that this year has specific FDA clearance. We'll talk more about that later. However, in February of this year, there was actually a voluntary recall of the Fitbit Force due to an atopic reaction or kind of a skin allergic reaction to some of the components in the cover on the Fitbit. In fact, in March, the Fitbit Force was permanently pulled from the market due to documented cases of contact dermatitis. So this is certainly not life-threatening, but perhaps more annoying. More about FDA approval. The FDA will classify devices according to risk. So only the highest risk devices, such as mechanical heart valves, implantable infusion pumps, require FDA approval before marketing. And then to receive FDA approval for these devices, the manufacturer must demonstrate that its device provides a reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. Moderate risk medical devices, such as dialysis equipment and many types of catheters, are cleared for marketing based on an FDA determination that they are substantially equivalent to an already legally marketed device of the same type. And predictably, the FDA has exempted certain low-risk medical devices, such as bandages or Band-Aids, from pre-market review when they are for the same use of the same technology as a legally marketed device of the same type. You can kind of think about this in the realms of these FDA-approved fitness monitors. However, the most common personal fitness trackers are not FDA-regulated or FDA-approved. There is, however, a British company called Camtech that recently received FDA approval for two devices aimed at data gathering for clear medical purposes. And that's an important distinction to make, that the data from the Camtech device will actually speak to the modulation and intervention of a physician, where the other data that we see from the commonly mass-marketed devices are more aimed at the end user. Just a point of note, Up just purchased Body Media for approximately $100 million. So there's some serious financial interest in the long-term evolution of this industry. There's also some insurance companies, as well as some in the insurance industry, that opine that a day may come where people may be given premiums based off of wearing these devices. In one sense, if you go for life insurance or health insurance, you have to fill out a survey. But wouldn't it be interesting if an insurance company could put a device on an individual and monitor them for a week or even a month to get a deeper insight and awareness into their overall health and activity levels? The goal, I think, essentially is to understand that these devices can impact the delivery of health care. One could also opine that checkups with a doctor may include downloading a device to help the doctor understand what activity levels are. And on balance, I believe that it makes sense that once these devices play a role in medical management, that it is appropriate that the FDA regulates the industry. So let's jump back to these devices. So as I said before earlier, I have one of these, but is often the case I've run across users that have had personal fitness monitors that end up in the junk drawer. In other words, it doesn't become a long-term part of their day-to-day life. However, the curve on the different types of wearable monitors are not flattening. As we know, this technology is evolving. Apple is currently developing and to be released this fiscal quarter a smartwatch that will basically, according to the industry, be a quote game changer end quote period. There's a recent study published this January by a mobile strategy company called Endeavor Partners that describes that as the novelty of devices wear off, people tend to abandon use. So there's always an evolution of a device to say, hey, what more can we give the user, or how can we keep the device on the user's arm? Despite the forecasted increase in sales, it has been documented that approximately 1/3 of Americans who own a wearable fitness device stop using it within 6 months. And looking at different market models, wearable monitors have arrived with such force and are in such nascent stages of development that these studies are far from predicting imminent demise. On one level, you can ask, why do people stop wearing monitors or put them down? In my own experience, I found that once I'd had several weeks worth of data and I can see patterns, the numbers cease to be as interesting to me. In other words, the data kind of flattens once I've had a chance to look at the objective data. And the paradigm is that if our patterns don't change, the data never changes. So the wearable device itself can still have value if you change your workout or have a certain plan to not have a static activity level. And again, data is only as good as what we do with it. So what can we make of sleep patterns generated from these devices? Looking at fitness trackers and sleep, a while back I spoke to these devices and their accelerometers. And it's important to understand that when sleep is being monitored by a personal fitness device, that the sensitivity of the accelerometers is enhanced. In some ways, you have to make the device more sensitive to when people are sleeping. The simple theory is that movement equals wakefulness and that prolonged lack of movement equals sleep. Again, these devices can't see if your eyes are closed or take a look at your brainwave activity. They use a proxy of movement from the accelerometer to determine whether you are asleep or awake. This technology has actually existed for years within sleep medicine and is known in the sleep community as actigraphy. It provides descriptive data about sleep, but lacks the intimate characterization of the data. In other words, it can tell you that you're not sleeping, but it can't give you an explanation as to why someone is not sleeping. More about how these monitors record sleep. In order to understand what the monitors are sensing, we need to discuss the fundamentals of movement during sleep. The up product, or the jawbone product, records sleep based on the lack of movement. It displays sleep as either light sleep, deep sleep, and awake. Prior to a sleep period with the up product, the band needs to be engaged into sleep mode. One of the buttons that you saw in the earlier skeletonized diagram needs to be pushed. The device is put in sleep mode, where the accelerometer then becomes more sensitive. This is a download, if you will, that shows a typical evening. And again, this doesn't show a 12-hour display like the activity monitor, but shows when the device was engaged in sleep mode at approximately 10:28 in the evening, and when the device was, quote, awoken at 6:15 in the morning. What you see illustrated are essentially three different areas along the graph. The light blue line correlates to light sleep, the dark blue lines correlate to deep sleep, and the orange lines correlate to wake. You can see that over the course of the evening, there's a dispersal pattern between deep sleep, deep sleep, and light sleep. Some people will automatically assume that the more deep sleep they're getting, the better, but the conversation is certainly more innuendo than that. And we'll speak to this later in the presentation. Much as the activity was broken down into time and duration, you can see that light sleep is given an aggregate amount of how much light sleep the individual is in, how much deep sleep the individual is in, how quickly the individual fell asleep, what the total sleep period was, and how much wake they had during the night, as well as the total number of arousals or periods where they woke up during the evening. So let me just steer off into sleep architecture for a minute, because I think this makes an understanding of the devices more salient when talking about the application and measuring sleep. Human beings sleep in 4 different stages, what we call N1 or stage 1, N2 stage 2, N3 stage 3, or REM sleep stage 4. For the sake of simplicity, some consider it easier to just say either non-REM sleep and REM sleep. And when we talk about non-REM sleep, we're talking about stages 1, 2, and 3. It's important to understand that in non-REM sleep, there is no muscle paralysis. In non-REM sleep, there is skeletal muscle movement. It is easy for this accelerometer on the fitness monitor to track this and then stage that as what it describes to be light sleep. But in REM sleep, the humans are paralyzed. Essentially, there is no skeletal muscle active during REM sleep, save some muscles on the outside of the eye, as well as the diaphragm. That's a good idea because you need to breathe, as well as the movements of the eye during REM sleep. So with that being said, the lack of movement during REM sleep is picked up by the personal monitoring device and then mapped as deep sleep. Normal stages of sleep break down percentage-wise to about 20% REM and 80% non-REM. Light sleep, or the lighter blue lines, would be recorded and correlated as stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 sleep. Deep sleep, if you remember, the REM sleep is recorded that way due to the accelerometer not detecting any movement and then tracking it as deep sleep. It's important to realize that it is normal to have movement in stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 sleep. The accelerometer records this and then maps it accordingly. However, in REM sleep, there is no movement due to the skeletal muscle paralysis. The accelerometer does not detect movement, and then this is dictated as REM. Gross sustained body movements, however, would be indexed as wake. So again, back to the diagram from the up monitor, you can see that the light blue areas, light sleep would correlate to N1, N2, N3. The deep sleep would correlate to REM. However, in this individual, this is somewhat abnormal. You see gross sustained motor movements would be indicated by the orange line, perhaps getting up, getting out of bed, getting a drink of water, or going to the bathroom. And in aggregate, these devices, these personal monitors, can then map and quantify and give you a total sleep period, a number of times you woke up over the night, as well as the overall relative percentages of deep sleep versus light sleep. So what does this all mean? And in the world of sleep medicine, our gold standard is something that we call the attended polysomnogram, or PSG. And it certainly bears noting that people have tried to correlate what a fitness band can tell you relative to what we can determine in a sleep study at a sleep lab. It is important to realize that personal fitness monitors are in the nascent stages of FDA approval to diagnose and treat any recognized sleeping disorder. So again, the data derived from a fitness monitor is a very rough proxy, but in no way, shape, or form really diagnoses any sleep disorder. Sleep researchers have pondered this issue and studies have been designed. There's a sleep researcher out of West Virginia University, Dr. Montgomery Down. She's a very nice lady. She's a neuroscientist who designed a study that looked at novel activity monitoring, in other words, these personal fitness devices, and how they correlate to sleep. And the purpose of her study was to delineate that although polysomnography or attended sleep studies is necessary for diagnosing most sleep disorders, these tests can be expensive, time-consuming, and intrusive, and that field-based activity monitoring is increasingly used as an alternative measure that can answer some clinical and research questions. And the purpose of the study was to evaluate the reliability and validity of novel activity monitoring devices, specifically the Fitbit, compared to both polysomnograms, or the attended sleep study, as well as the standard actigraphy, or what we use in sleep medicine to measure movement. So looking more at the Montgomery Down study, the methods were to test the validity, the simultaneous validity between a Fitbit and an actigraph. And these two devices were worn during standard overnight sleep studies by 24 healthy adults at the West Virginia University Sleep Research Lab. And what you wanted to do was see what the interfit reliability was. In other words, device to patient, in consistently reporting reliable results as compared to polysomnograms. The results themselves show that the Fitbit has a very high inter-device reliability, and that the Fitbit and Actigraph differed significantly on recording total sleep time and sleep efficiency between each other and polysomnography. Both the Fitbit and Actigraph overestimated sleep efficiency and total sleep time. The sensitivity of both Fitbit and actigraphy for accurately identifying sleep was high within all stages of sleep and arousals, though. The specificity for both Fitbit and actigraph for accurately identifying wake was poor. The specificity of actigraphy was higher except for wake before sleep onset, and the sensitivity of Fitbit was higher in all sleep stages and during arousals. A way to kind of translate this is it's very easy for these devices, both the standard actigraph, the activity monitor we use in sleep medicine, as well as these personal fitness monitors, to be quote unquote fooled if somebody to be awake and not moving. In other words, to be quiet and still. So the conclusions to be had from the Montgomery Down study is that the web-based Fitbit, available at a markedly reduced price and with several convenience factors compared to standard actigraphy, may be an acceptable measurement instrument for the use in normative populations in measuring total sleep time versus wakefulness. However, the Fitbit had the same specific limitations as actigraphy, that both devices consistently misidentify wake as sleep and thus overestimate both sleep time and quality. Furthermore, use of the Fitbit will also require specific validation before it can be used to assess disordered populations or different age groups. Again, one has to understand that these studies were done on healthy volunteers and not individuals with diagnosed sleep disorders. So the bottom line, in the study of 24 healthy adults, both the Fitbit and the Actigraph overestimated overnight sleep time compared with the lab test, the Fitbit by over an hour and the Actigraph by about 45 minutes. One can conclude that essentially these devices may tell you you are asleep more than you truly are. And there was also another study that was presented at a sleep researchers meeting in November of 2013 that actually found the opposite effect in children, a very curious confounder that the tracker underestimated how long the children were asleep by over 100 minutes. Implications. Some experts worry that there may be dangers in consumers putting too much trust in these devices to accurately monitor sleep, and especially in users that may have an underlying sleep disorder. For people without sleep disorders, I believe that using a fitness monitor to track sleep isn't going to hurt or help them. But if someone presents with a sleep disorder, tracking sleep with one of these monitors might provide false reassurance. Sleep trackers with only an accelerometer cannot provide much insight into the quality of sleep. For instance, a person with sleep apnea may stop breathing 300 times a night, but this wouldn't be detected by a motion detector on the wrist. Many sleep specialists feel exceptionally uncomfortable giving someone a clean bill of, quote, sleep health, quote, based solely on data from these devices. If there's an appreciable degree of movement on the device or lack of deep sleep, light sleep, that is clearly helpful in trying to formulate an explanation, as well as to justify next steps and examining the patient with a formal sleep study. These devices can encourage changes in behavior by healthy people who simply want to sleep better, particularly by giving people a more complete awareness of how long they are sleeping at night. And it is my clinical observation that patients are more sleep deprived than they realize, and these devices can help broaden that awareness. Some more implications and specifically novel ideas on insomnia. More advanced devices are coming out. As I understand, the recent American Academy of Sleep Medicine meeting did show some of these devices in combination with microphones and pulse leads that picked up snoring, as well as other proxy data around around people's sleep habits. There's also some systems out there that integrate not only the objective data to be gained from a personal monitor, but also integrating that into cognitive behavioral therapy interventions for insomnia. The sleep rate system is one that appears to be getting a lot of traction, and this not only takes a look at activity, but also monitors the user's heart rate during the night to examine whether there's some degree of hyperarousal, and then using the patient's heart rate as an index to when that arousal was throughout the night. Based on the data analysis, after a week of using the sleep rate, people showing signs of insomnia are then presented with a personalized sleep regimen to help mitigate the insomnia using the integrated CBTI with the sleep rate system. Some more implications. The suggestions from the sleep rate device are basic, but a randomized control trial found that they were effective in 85% of cases of insomnia. The suggestions include some basic tenets of sleep hygiene, which is waking at the same time every day, stopping invigorating activity 1.5 hour before bedtime, and using the bedroom for appropriate purposes only. And there's also been an area of intrigue where people have been able to pull metadata from multiple users to take a look at other patterns that can be associated with sleep pathology or insomnia. One such company, the Jawbone Company, looked at a lot of corollary data that they mine. And I'm sure in this age of social media, what we look at and the questions we ask, as well as the environments that we live in, can all shape and formulate marketing strategies. So these companies are smart in trying to understand patterns that go far beyond just when we go to bed and how long we sleep. The Jawbone Company took a look at an analysis of Jawbone Up users and discovered that users who slept with bed partners went to bed an average of half hour earlier than those individuals who slept alone. There's also information that suggests from Up users that people that kept a laptop in their bedroom logged 27 fewer minutes of sound sleep compared to individuals who didn't keep a computer by their bedside. And this overall helps in identification of risk factors and trends that leads towards more personalized recommendations regarding sleep health and wellness. This is a brief aside. There's an application for smartphones now called Up Coffee. This was recently released. This free application lets you measure the impact that caffeine ingestion can have on your sleep. Essentially, the app is rather simple. You input your age, weight, and height. On the application itself, you log all the caffeinated beverages that you've ingested over the course of the day. The Up Coffee app will analyze the data and come up with a projected sleep time. Up Coffee then actually shows you on a graph how you are, quote, set for sleep in ranges that go from, quote, wired, end quote, to sleep ready. This is just more of an aside and fun facts from Up users. Not only did they take a look at demographics based on sleeping patterns, but also based on gender. You can see that the typical woman sleeps with 2 pillows. The typical man sleeps with 1. Again, this is also metadata from the Up user profiles. Again, we had mentioned earlier that the Up users went to bed about a half hour earlier if they had a bed partner than Up users that slept alone. That approximately 81% of women sleep on their sides compared to roughly half of men that just sleep on their sides. Also noted that men were approximately 19% more likely to browse the internet after 5 p.m. than women, and that upwearers who report browsing the internet after 5 p.m. go to bed approximately a half hour later than Up users who don't browse the internet after 5 p.m. More fun facts. 80% of Up users sleep with a mobile phone in their bedroom. That women are 47% more likely to make the bed when they wake up in the morning. I can attest to that. Men are 8 times more likely than women to have their beds made for them. Women are 3 times more likely than men to sleep in their socks, and that men are twice as likely as women to sleep naked. So perhaps these personal devices, as well as these companies, tell us more than we need to know, but at times this truly can be fascinating and fun information. I do appreciate your time and attention this afternoon. Thank you.